Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Ennis again, and I will be hosting the webinar for the next hour or so. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. This is an advertisement for the upcoming SQTM conference in the Washington, D.C. area, May 31st through June 5th. Lots of training there, full-day tutorials, concurrent track sessions, management solutions workshop, certification classes will be taught there. And as you can see, if you register by the end of March, you can save up to $500. For more information, you can go to our website, qualitymanagementconference.com, for hotel information, find out what the tutorials are all about. Hopefully I'll see you there. The purpose of this webinar, if I can flip back, is to give you an overview of one of the courses that will be taught there. It's called A Practical Guide to Assessing Your Organization Using the Testing Maturity Model. And once again, I am Mike Ennis. If you guys have questions, I prefer to save your questions until the end of the conference, until the end of the webinar. So as we begin, just a little information about myself. I am an adjunct instructor for the company, and I teach several courses throughout the year. This is one of them. I also teach courses on agile testing as well as defect prevention. I am a global testing consultant, currently for Capgemini, one of the major consulting firms in the United States as well as globally. I've been in testing for the better part of 25 years, everything from quality assurance to assessments to delivery management, and I've been teaching probably about the last 10 to 12 years, as well as a speaker at several industry conferences. Today's agenda, and as I mentioned, it's going to be a high-level conversation. We'll talk about the need for assessments, understanding the why, the what, the when and how of the assessment process. We'll talk about some key value levers when you think about process improvement. We'll briefly look at some of the process key deliverables. If we have time, we'll go over some sample assessments, talk a little bit about risk as well as scheduling and conducting the assessment. But for this webinar, I will probably really focus on the first three bullets, really understanding the why, the what, and the when as to why we do things. So let's talk about the why. What's the need for conducting an assessment? And what I have here are some common testing challenges that you all may have faced. This list isn't supposed to be all-inclusive, but I think I've captured some of the more common reasons for testing challenges that we all have faced. I don't have them listed in any specific order, but I'll start with common testing challenges. Inefficient test plans. There's lots of reasons why many of our test plans might be inefficient. Probably the easiest one might be getting involved late in the testing project, which is extremely common, especially in many companies where you might have a limited number of wide range of applications. You can't be in 3 places at once. So you may have a resource, you may be rolling off a resource, rolling on to the next project, but that project has already started. So by the time you get engaged, it's almost time to start testing. So, and that's just a common reason. So when that's the case, we haven't had sufficient time to be a part of the project from the very beginning. So our understanding of the requirements and design is a bit limited. So this causes our testing plans to be inefficient. When you have an inefficient test plan, you run the risk of not being able to test the right things or potentially missing something. So defects tend to leak to later testing phases or even into production. Other common testing challenges: late identification of errors or defects going not detected, probably a byproduct of having an inefficient test plan. If you've got testers that are engaged late, then therefore you're going to be finding defects late or not finding the right defects early in the process. And then you may have defects that go undetected at all. Because typically what happens is if you've got inefficient time to test, then you really can't do a thorough job of testing everything that you would normally test under normal circumstances. When I'm talking about what you would normally test, a good array of positive as well as negative test cases. So normally when we're strapped for time, we're going to test the things that we know should work. So these are pretty much going to be our positive test cases, but we may not be able to do a thorough job testing some of the negative test cases that truly are where a lot of the issues go undetected and our customers ultimately find. Inconsistent use of test methods and tools. Very, very common, especially when you don't have a centralized testing organization. Everyone is testing the application based on their own knowledge, so they're using their own methodology, their own process in which to review requirements and turn those requirements into test conditions and test scripts. So there's a lot of inconsistency in terms of how things are done from person to person. If you have a lot of contractors on your teams, once again, not under a centralized testing umbrella, then everyone is bringing their own templates and perhaps even some tools that they've used to the table, and it allows for, it may work for them, but you lack the consistency across the organization. And then what happens if that resource were to leave? Then you may or may not have captured that methodology or the exact tools that that person was using. You may be working in inconsistent or insufficient test environments. Your developers may not have a thorough environment to do their unit and assembly testing. So not uncommon. So they may be looking to leverage the actual QA environment to do a lot of their integration, which causes now your QA environment to be less than pristine. And there are issues that may cause inconsistency with how you're doing testing from an environment perspective as well as a test data perspective. Not to mention, where is your performance testing going to be held? Are you trying to do too much within the same environment from one team perspective, or do you just don't have enough environment? So you've got other applications that need to leverage the same environment in order to do things. So now you've got contingency factors, you've got data being misused incorrectly or inadvertently. There's a high operating cost, which is kind of our next challenge. Sometimes we might be testing too much, or we may have too many testing resources on site at the same time, which is driving up our overall costs. An example of that, we're going to talk a little bit about understanding what the cost is. So let's say your company is based in New York City. So you can imagine that you have a high operating cost for all of your resources that are necessary to be on site. Lack of reuse, not enough automation. So normally if you don't have enough testers, then probably not going to have a lot of automation. So there's a lot of test cases that are being rerun manually, pretty inefficient. A lot of that can absolutely be automated, which would also drive down costs. The next activity or challenge, you've got test activities conducted by non-testers. It's hard to believe, but that is still extremely common, especially in some sectors within the United States. I can speak personally about about manufacturing sectors where their budgets are very, very tight. Many manufacturing clients or companies, they don't have dedicated testers for their projects. So a percentage of the developers and business analysts' time is spent doing testing. So as a result of that, the overall testing quality usually suffers because developers and BAs, while they can test certain things, they definitely don't have the skill set that we all have on this call right now to understand everything that needs to be tested. So going back to having the inefficient test plan, they're going to focus their testing really on some of the basics. But the potential to miss out on a lot of other things that a customer might do is still present. Overall lack of quality in the application development process, which is probably the root cause of a lot of the testing challenges, because it starts there, starting with requirements, and I've got that down at the bottom as well. It's still a known fact that 60 to 70% of all defects are directly traced back to requirements. Companies still don't do a good job of writing thorough, complete, unambiguous, clear, testable requirements. And when that's the case, those things get trickled down into our designs, our code, and then ultimately we find those things in testing. Getting back up to the development processes, so we've got a lot of different development methodologies that are in place right now. We've got a lot of companies still using waterfall. We've got companies that are agile. We've got companies that want to be agile but aren't ready to be agile, but they still try to be agile, which causes issues. We've got companies that are waterfall that have to be agile, otherwise they're going to be put out of business by their competition. So they have to go agile, but they're not ready to go agile. So whether they want to go agile or they have to go agile, the result is the same. Their waterfall processes aren't mature. They lack a lot of the key fundamental elements that make up a good software development lifecycle. And then when they go to the agile process, as you know, agile just speeds everything up. And there's less documentation. So with the combination of both of those things, it makes testing an extreme challenge because we don't have the information that we need in order to adequately conduct our test planning. We've got a mixed match of quality from a coding perspective going into tests. So it really just trickles down into the formal testing phases. Last bullet there, high management overhead due to defragmentation of the organization. A lot of big words. Basically that means you've got a lot of silos in the organization. So you've got this group testing this way, this group testing that way. You might have a team overseas or in another country testing that way. All of them have their own test leads and test management. They've got their own structure. So what you've got a lot of little fiefdoms, but not any consistency across the organization, which leads to a lot of overhead. You can consolidate many of those groups and probably reduce that overall high management cost by 10 to 15%. So these are some of the common reasons uh, of testing challenges as to why we might want to conduct an assessment. Another reason why we might want to conduct an assessment is whether you are an experienced assessor or not, you should be, or we should all be looking at our organization for areas of process improvement. That should be, as a test manager, test lead, that should be part of our normal makeup. We should always be looking for ways to do things more efficiently and to help save our company's money. Whether that's, automation, whether that's offshoring, whether that's a lot of different areas, we should always be looking for opportunities or identifying areas that are costing our company lots of money and looking for ways in order to reduce that. Normally, as a new manager coming into a new organization, this would probably be one of the first things that you would do. You want to look at that organization and understand what's going on with that organization and put together an action plan for your key recommendations for making that organization better. That's probably one of the first things that any one of us needs to do once we go into a new company or we adopt a new application. We need to assess kind of where they are, baseline that organization. So when we talk about assessments, I know it sounds formal, but I believe that most of us have formed some type of assessment, whether it be formal or informal. So what are some of the tangible benefits out of conducting assessments? And I start here for a reason, because one, process improvement usually costs money, and senior management, typically they need to understand what's the ROI before they're going to give us time, resources, or money to do certain things. So often we have to supply a business case for why we want to do certain things, and that's definitely the case with conducting an enterprise assessment. So these are some standard figures that we have compiled probably over the last 10 years of what some of the typical savings, you would get out of implementing some of these benefits. And as you can see, the table we're looking at, let's start on the right-hand side, overall cost reduction. I'll start from the 5%. Usually we can reduce our overall costs. And when we say our overall costs, what's your overall IT spend for a particular project? Not just your testing budget, but what does it cost you to develop a product or a project or an application? What's your overall budget? I'm going to make sure I'm clear that I'm not just talking about your testing budget. It's your overall cost to develop software. So with the standardization of processes and tools, you can save up to 5%. With automation or defect prevention and things like that, you can save really another 5%. Automation, you can save up to probably 5 to 10%, as well as some productivity gains by leveraging the same tool set, which is another problem. We have defragmented organizations that are using some of the same tool sets, and they all have their own agreement with the vendor. Instead of having centralized licenses, that way you can get a better price advantage when you are trying to negotiate with companies like HP. You can gain about 10% through automation and environment consolidation and things like that. The last 20% is labor arbitrage. Basically what labor arbitrage means, two things. One, labor arbitrage. Do you have senior people doing testing that a junior person can do? For example, and I'm just using money figures, you're paying a senior tester $100 an hour to do something when you really could be paying a junior tester, let's say $60 an hour to do the exact same thing. So do you have the right pyramid within your company? Meaning the right levels. Do you have junior testers? Do you have mid-level testers? Do you have senior testers? And are you using them in the most effective fashion? Or getting back to one of our challenges on the other page, do you have developers? We're paying developers $200 an hour to do testing. You don't need to pay a resource $200 an hour to do testing. Additionally, can you move some of your testing offshore or to a lower cost region? I'm going to go back to the example at the very beginning that I talked about, New York. So let's say your company is in New York and you've got a test team of 50 people. 50 people working on site in New York, as you can imagine, can be extremely expensive for New York City. Can you move a percentage of that testing to an offshore location? I think most of us have started working with companies in India as well as some other low-cost locations, even in Mexico if you need to go near shore. We all know that we can get very good testing resources, maybe from your company or from consulting companies, where you might be paying $20 an hour for a very good resource. So it would be a tremendous amount of savings if you could take a percentage of that 50 people that you now have got on site in New York and move 20-25% of that to an offshore location for a lower cost. A tremendous amount of savings can come from that. So that's the other 20%. So you add all of those things up, and you have a cost percentage of up to 50% cost reduction of your overall IT spend, which is a tremendous amount of savings. So it's a very compelling business case that if you conduct this assessment and you are able to identify some areas that you're within these buckets where your company could do things better, you could perhaps be saving your company up to 50% of what they normally spend on an annual basis. I mean, that's very attractive to senior management. As we break down really the what, so what are some of these levers, and I kind of talked about them over the past couple of slides. This gives a little bit further breakdown into exactly what we mean or what the cost levers are or the value levers. And it really comes down to people, process, and tools. When you think about an assessment, that's really the key things that you look at. I need to look at the people, the organization, how they're structured. Do they have the right people doing testing? Are they at the right level? Can we move some of this offshore to a lower cost region, or do I need to have heavy presence on site, maybe customer facing? So that's the people. Processes. Do I have the right processes? Does everyone understand our processes? Are we using consistent processes across our company? Because if you're using a consistent process, that should be making testing more efficient and at a higher level of quality. Tools. Do I have the right tools in place? Automation, environment, smoke testing, centralized tools so that I'm getting the best value from my software vendors. So people, process, and tools as we look at this tree and go from left to right. Diving more into the optimal sourcing, I kind of talked about this on the other slide. Can we reduce our labor costs? And you can see that that's a huge percentage, 20 to 40%. Is there any way we can reduce our labor costs? And when I say that, some people's natural reaction might be, so you're talking about getting rid of jobs? Are people going to lose their jobs? No, this isn't about people losing their jobs. This is allowing your resources to be more efficient and productive at what they do. So I'm going to go back to the example that I said earlier about there's some companies where developers spend 25, 30% of their time testing as well as BAs. Well, as a testing professional and as a consultant for the past 15 years, when I see that, my first conversation with the CIO or that VP is, we need to do something about that. Because I don't need my developers testing. I need my developers being the best developer that they can possibly be. I need him concentrating on designs, coding, code reviews, doing the best job that developer can be to develop code. I don't need my BAs testing. I need my BAs writing better requirements so that my developers can make sure that we're developing the right thing. Of course, I'm going to leverage my BA's knowledge to make sure that from a testing team, we're testing the right thing. But I need my BAs concentrating on writing better requirements and perhaps being able to add more functionality. Add more functionality to the next release. Instead of getting stuck in the actual delivery of this, your BAs should be looking forward, going to the next thing, and writing better requirements for the next application. Additionally, for the existing testing resources, so if we move a percentage to the offshore, what are my existing dedicated testers going to do? Be better testers. Because when you think about offshoring, it's not necessarily I'm just giving this offshore team full responsibility for testing this application. When you start out, I may give that offshore team the responsibility for maintenance or regression testing or building some automated suites, while my main guys still focus on working very closely with the business and the project team, doing maybe some ad hoc or guerrilla testing, really trying to find some of those hard to find defects. Let the offshore guys do the rudimentary stuff that we do all the time, the regression and all this and that. So I'm not giving that offshore team, and I'm just using it as an example, I'm not just turning over everything to that offshore team. I'm using that team to do some of the tasks that I want to take away from my onshore team so that my onshore guys can really focus on ensuring we're testing the right thing and really finding some of those hard to find defects. So it's really making that onshore team a lot more effective and a lot more efficient. And you are leveraging that offshore team. And while we're on the offshore thing, people think that the main reason why you would have a team in India is for cost. That's one of them, yeah. That's one of them. But I can tell you when I first started leveraging teams in India about, 15 years ago, it really wasn't about the cost. It was really about productivity. Because since India's time zone is, 13, 14 hours ahead of ours, I found that I could do twice as much testing in the same day because I've got testers onshore doing testing 8-9 hours in the U.S. We go home. My India team comes in. They start testing. So I'm getting about 16, 17, maybe 18 hours of testing in one calendar day. So that's one of the key reasons why I moved to offshore, because I wanted to do things a lot faster, a lot more efficient. My team finds defects during the day. The developers fix them. I've got my offshore team retesting those defects. So by the time my team comes back the next morning, we can just pick up from where we left off. Very, very efficient if done the right way. We talked about pyramid management. Do I have the right pyramid within my test organization? Do I have all senior guys, which are high cost, or do I have a nice ratio of junior testers, maybe some college folks coming in? That way I've got a good consistency throughout my organization. I don't have 100% high cost resources within my team. I've got some low cost, I've got some medium cost, which should be the most, and then I've got a very small few of high cost, which really should be my leads or managers. As we move to, that's getting into the resource utilization. Reduced overhead. So we talked about the segmentation, defragmentation of organization. So if you move to a centralized organization, you can remove some of those managers. When I say remove, I'm not talking about get rid of, I'm not talking about fire. I'm talking about they can be retasked to do other things. We don't need as much overhead if we are centralizing our organization, which can add to reduced costs. Testing resource pool. So now I'm cross-training those resources. So I've got testers that can test more than one application, which will make those testers a lot more efficient and a lot more valuable to the organization. So instead of having a dedicated tester for a particular application, I may cross-train that tester on a set of applications. So that is, one comes up and another goes down, that resource can roll onto that team, etc. And it's not sitting idle because the application that he understands is only busy 6 months out of the year. The increased automation. We definitely want to have which starts with having a good regression set. Got to have a good regression suite, and we want to automate that. You can save lots of money, lots of time by automating. Companies aren't investing enough in automation, and the value is tremendous. It also improves your testing efficiency around your automating your acceptance tests or smoke tests for environments. As we move down into improved quality, the increased test coverage, early defect detection, having the right environments. If you have the right environments, you're going to reduce the amount of defects that are caused by those environments. Early detection of defects. So now this is kind of getting also back into the sourcing. If you have the right people in place, they're engaged early doing requirements, they can start identifying and removing and preventing defects during those earlier stages, during analyze, design, and build. The companies that get this, they know that if I find defects later, it's going to cost me more to fix. So what's the opposite of that? I need to find defects earlier. So they know that if I'm finding defects in my formal testing phases, that's okay, but that's too late. I would rather find them before they even get developed, before they even get designed. That's why we need to get in early, doing the early defect detection. Using the consistent methodology. So now this is around our processes. Standardizing our tool sets. Making sure we're using the right tools and not doing things in Excel and Word that are very, very inefficient, and lead itself to lots of errors and mistakes. Getting into our best practices, such as risk-based testing, understanding at the requirements level what we need to test, when we need to test it, how we need to test it, so that we can ensure that we're doing the right level of testing where appropriate, and we're not over-testing our application. Using some other techniques such as orthogonal array or hexawise. So if you've got an existing test suite or it might be a new application, really identifying what are the critical combinations of tests that you can run to still have the same level of quality without jeopardizing that. Just as an example, you might have a test suite that has 1,000 test cases. Using orthogonal array analysis, you might be able to reduce that test set to 500 test cases, and you haven't jeopardized the quality of it. That's a tremendous amount of savings right there, and it's very, very powerful. Orthogonal array testing and risk-based testing, so that we can get more from less. We're all challenged to do things a lot faster with the same resources. Those are excellent methodologies to use to help reduce the amount of testing that we need to do without reducing the quality. I'm taking the same value lever or value tree that you just saw on that other page, and now I am putting some dollar figures to it. And we're still talking about, we haven't gotten to the assessment, we're still talking about perhaps helping you develop that business case in order to conduct the assessment. Or this is the output of that assessment, your business case in order to do some of these things. So you can see we got our value levers on the right-hand side: quality, productivity, and sourcing. Kind of change the order around, but it's still the same. And then, so you see some dollar figures there. Those dollar figures are driven from your cost savings percentage. So you see the 9% for increased coverage. You see the 5%, the 4%, the 8%, the 29%. Where do those percentages come from? I'm going to go back, and I'm going to show you the cost. You see the in the middle of this screen here, you see those percentage ranges. That's where that's coming from, and these are industry standard. These aren't just from percentages that I've just made up. So let's look at the reduced labor cost, 20 to 40%. Let's go here. Our reduced labor cost, let's say it was 29%. So this is, how did we come up with the 29%? So this is doing an analysis of your labor of your organization. And the differences between being on the low end of that versus the high end of that is going to be your overall maturity level, which is the purpose, which is the outcome of our assessment, to identify low maturity versus high maturity. So if you have a low mature organization, then the savings that you should get out of that particular area should be high. And conversely, if your organization is highly mature, then the amount of savings are going to be relatively low, because evidently you're already doing some of these things. So you're not going to get as much value out of implementing them. Does that make sense? So now you see for each of these areas, we've calculated the 9, the 5, the 4, and the 8, the 29%. And this is directly against your overall IT spend. So if I were to add that up, the total savings columns, that's about $32 million, give or take. $32 million on an annual basis. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of money, and it would be to me, that gives you justification enough from your senior management perspective to go off and implement some of these things. Because right now we haven't implemented anything. We've done the assessment, we've done the analysis, and we are projecting that if we make the following recommendations, that we should be able to retain or capture some of the savings that you see there. So let's kind of look at the what. So what are we assessing? Assessing your company's end-to-end testing and quality assurance and QA assessment processes. We need to understand what the challenges are. What's going on with the organization? which is your baseline or your as is. Once we capture your as is, we want to do some analysis against where you are versus where the industry is, and that's where your testing maturity comes in, your TMM. There's certain standards for organizations in which it's giving you very clear levels of maturity for every single testing area. We'll get to the testing area next. So you understand what that gap is. So you've got an as-is, as well as doing that comparison against the industry standards. And more than likely, there's going to be a gap. So that in that gap, you've got to develop recommendations in order to increase your level of maturity. So we're developing recommendations, and it might be into a testing center of excellence, or it may not. It just might be just to improve the processes of our organization. And then once you have identified those recommendations, we develop a roadmap, okay? What's going to be the roadmap for implementing these things? You can't do all of these things at once. What needs to happen first, et cetera, et cetera. So what are you going to assess? On the right-hand side of this slide, we're looking at our test organization, how the team is set up, the levels, the people. Are they dedicated resources? Are they trained testers? We're going to look at your test strategy. Are you using consistent methodologies or processes? Does everyone understand them? We're going to look at the percentage or level of automation that your department has. Are there opportunities for automation? We're going to look at how your environments are being managed. Do you have enough environments? Or is there contention around those environments? We're going to look at your data. How are you managing data? Is each person creating their own data? Or do you have a consistent methodology around how data is to be created and used, which adds more consistency? Because if you don't have a consistent environment and you don't have consistent data, your automation isn't going to work, because you're constantly going to be updating your automation scripts because something is going to get broken. So one of the prerequisites, and this is kind of getting towards that roadmap, one of the prerequisites is if you don't have a stable environment and you don't have a stable test data process, then your automation is never going to work. So you've got to do those two things before you fix your automation. We're going to look at performance testing. Now, these are all the different things that you can be looking at. You don't have to assess all of these things, but this is just a list of the areas that you should be looking at. So how are you conducting your performance testing? Is it necessary or not? What are the issues? How are you managing your requirements? From an analysis perspective, the quality of those requirements, traceability into your test cases. What's your estimation processes? Are you estimating your testing projects accurately? How are you managing your overall test project? Do you have the right structure in place? Your reporting. Do you have the right governance? Defect prevention. Are your testers able to get involved earlier? Talked about that a few minutes ago. Are your people involved in the processes early, or are they just there just in time so that they can get engaged in some defect prevention, some static testing, start identifying and removing defects earlier? Do you have the right tools in place? You still doing things by hand or by Excel and Word, or are you using test management tools to house all of your requirements, your test cases, your test runs, your defects? Is that tool being used consistently? Is it a consistent process? Are you using fields the same way? This is very important. Because one of the things that I would do from an assessment perspective is I would want to take a data dump of all of your defects. It could go back your last 6 months, last 2 years. I want to look at all your defects, and I want to do some analysis on those defects to see how the organization is finding defects, what type of defects they're being found, where they're being found, by whom are they being found. So if you want to hear more about how that analysis is done, I would highly recommend you look at our defect prevention. Actually, it's my class. Look at our defect prevention webinar. Very important. You can tell a lot from an organization by just looking at their defect data. The defect data is really the black box. That's the infamous black box that's on every airplane. That black box is our defects. That tells you a lot of how an organization does things or how they don't do things. We want to look at your metrics. Are you reporting the right thing? Do you have the right metrics? Or are you lacking? What's your reporting to? Do you have the right dashboards? Are you presenting the information the way it needs to be presented so that actions can be taken? And then there may be some other more specific capabilities that are going to be specific to your particular company. So that is really the scope of what your assessment could consist of. And like I said, this is just a laundry list. There could be more. There could be, you could choose to assess less of this. Some requirements that are needed. So as I'm coming to assess an organization, there are going to be certain artifacts that I am going to request prior to conducting that assessment. Here are some of them so that I can do my prep work before I come on site. I want to look at your organizational structure, so you might have an org chart. I want to look at sample test plan, test strategies, so I can see your processes. I want to look at, give me sample test cases. I want to see how you're writing your test cases. I want to look at your test management process, defect management process, how you're managing your environments, your test data, issues. I want to look at some other test artifacts. I mentioned test cases. I want to look at a sample requirements traceability matrix, test results. I want to look at some test reports, dashboards. I talked on the previous slide about defect data. Yes, I want a data dump of your defects, at least over the past 6 months, and if you've got a year's worth, that's great as well. I want to do some root cause analysis on that. So those are the artifacts that I'm going to look at prior to conducting the assessment or coming on site. That's the prep work. And then I need to talk to some people. So I want to talk to the test manager and QA manager lead. Now this is by application. So if you're assessing several applications, then you need to multiply this by the number of applications that you're going to be assessing. So for this example, we're assuming that this is one application. So I want to talk to that, whoever that QA lead, QA manager is. I want to talk to the development manager. I want to talk to whoever the project or release manager might be. If we're assessing automation, I want to talk to the automation lead. If we're assessing performance, I want to talk to that performance lead. I want to talk to your configuration build manager so I can understand how code is being deployed in those environments. You might be asking yourself, so if I've given you all that documentation, why do you need to talk to the people? Well, you need both. Because in many cases, you can talk to the people, and the people can tell you everything is rosy. Oh, yeah, we got everything. But then I need to see it. But then on other cases, if you show me this documentation, many companies like to write or create a lot of nice documentation of processes, but they put them up on the shelf. Nobody's using them. So I'm taking both things. I've got to do some analysis on those artifacts, which are going to cause me to ask some questions. And then when I talk to the people, I need to make sure that what they're saying is aligned with the processes that they've given me. And I'm going to ask them some other questions about some specific things going on in the organization, but you need both sides of the story in order to do that. You can see I'm not just talking to the test manager. I'm talking to everybody that's involved in that particular application. I could have put BA here as well from the business. So you want to get everybody's input in terms of their overall assessment or their experience with that particular application. This will be the last slide that I conduct. So the way you would lay this out, and you can call these phases, the first phase is that planning and preparation. So during that phase, you are identifying the scope of the assessment. You're identifying who you need to interview as a part of that team. You are identifying the documentation that you need from them. You're sending that out to them, and hopefully they will send you those artifacts during that first week. That could be a day, that could be 2 days, that could be a week. That's why I don't have any timelines on here. That's a part of your preparation. As you move to phase 2, conducting the actual assessment, so that's when you're on site, that's when you're talking in person or maybe even over the phone. So you've looked at those documents, and now you're having those interviews with those individuals that I identified on the previous page. Your QA manager, your dev manager, your project manager, your release manager, etc. So now I'm, after I've got those artifacts, now that I've talked to people, I have documented my findings. And then you move to your reporting your results. So now that I have my findings, I've got to do that gap analysis between what they told me versus what the industry standards are or the industry best practice. And I'm identifying those gaps, which are going to feed my overall recommendations, which is going to be develop my improvement recommendations. So that's normally in the form of an executive summary or a readout in which you're going to present your findings to senior management at the end of that. So with that, I would like to thank you all for hanging in there for our webinar. Would love to see you as a part of the class in DC coming up in a few months. If you have any questions about the seminar or about the conference, you can reach out to the organization directly. And want you all to have a great weekend and hope to see you in a few months. Thank you.